Yeah, what I was saying off the top was obviously, as we expected yesterday, the sports community, really everybody, but the sports community in particular, reacted to the indictment related to, but not in direct response to, Breonna Taylor's killing yesterday in Louisville. And particularly NBA players, we knew they would have a lot to say before the Heat Celtics game last night. So after the game, though, Bam Adebayo, he not only dedicated the game and dedicated the win to Breonna, but he also said that they tried to channel their anger into the game. So I wanted to start with that word with you and ask you, how have you been dealing with your anger? All of us are angry. How have you been dealing with your anger since yesterday?
So it's a great question, Mike. It's a work in progress. It's a work in progress. I can't say I've been dealing with it successfully because throughout the night and throughout the day today, it's just always another aspect of it and always another layer that comes to my mind that makes me angry or makes me disappointed. I think that's the word too, disappointed, because I was thinking about this today, and it's a great question, and I'm going to answer your question in a second, but I was thinking about this on the way in. For people in this business, the journalism side of things, you always talk about objectivity. I know we'll have a debate on this another time. I don't believe that objectivity truly exists. I think we're all subjective, trying to be fair. The people who are doing it right, but nobody's truly objective. The only person who's really objective is a robot. You have feelings, you have an experience that brought you to the point that you're in right now, and so all of that matters, and it colors the way you look at things. But this is not the time. But that being said, Mike, this is not the time for anybody to be objective. This is not the time for anybody to kind of stand back and, hey, let's look at both sides. There are no both sides. There's no both sides of this. And I wrote down today, it's time to be an advocate. And that's just an umbrella. I got all kinds of things under that umbrella. Ida B. Wells is a big name because Ida B. Wells was going through the South, looking around and seeing people be lynched. She was looking at lynchings, and they were not being dealt with. Nobody was held accountable. Nobody was talking about it. So she was a journalist who said, no, I'm going to talk about this. I'm not going to be objective. There's no other side. There are monstrosities happening in this so-called democracy, these yet-to-be United States, as James Baldwin said. So I'm going to talk about it. And so I think that's where we are now. Everybody has got to declare, where do you stand? Let me know where you stand. If you are against this, if you have a problem with this, thanks for letting me know. So that's where I am, Mike. And as far as channeling anger, lots of ways. On one hand, I pray on it. I've been praying on it for months, just on the state that we're in, the chaotic state that we're in as a country and as a global society. That's one. But secondly, I go back and forth, and I'd love to know how you feel about this, because I know how close you were to your grandparents, and just like I was with mine. And my grandfather grew up in Selma, Alabama, early 1900s. And he got out. And so he got out, and if that doesn't seem like a big deal, you have to understand what the sharecropping system was at that time. Like, there was really no freedom. You had to sneak out of there, because if you were in a sharecropping situation and you left and you were black, they would hunt you down. So he got out of Selma, and he was always talking about that, being independent and fighting for what's right and having integrity. And so I think about my grandparents and what they went through. So as angry as I am, and as disappointed as I am, I keep saying, I can't cave in, I can't give in, because I owe them something. I owe that entire generation, those generations, I owe them my effort, I owe them my resources, I owe them my intellect, everything I've got. I got to give it to them, because they've done so much to put us in this position.
And the generations to come, for that matter.
That's right.
I want to stay with that word and that theme of anger. As I and many others like yourself tried to process it, tried to manage it, tried to deal with it, and figure out what are the most constructive and productive ways to channel it. And you referenced James Baldwin earlier. And a lot of people are familiar with the quote, Negro and relatively conscious in this country is to be in a state of rage almost all the time. But I want to read the quote in its entirety, because as with everything that James Baldwin said, it was powerful and it was important. The man didn't waste words. So let me read the entire quote. To be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a state of rage almost all the time, and in one's work. And part of the rage is this: it isn't only what is happening to you, but it's what's happening all around you and all of the time in the face of the most extraordinary and criminal indifference of most white people in this country and their ignorance. Now, since this is so, it's a great temptation to simplify the issues under the illusion that if you simplify them enough, people will recognize them. I think this illusion is very dangerous because, in fact, it isn't the way it works. A complex thing can't be made simple. You simply have to try to deal with it in all its complexity and hope to get that complexity across. And the reason I wanted to share that whole thing, because a common response you've seen, and it's true, since yesterday, is that Breonna Taylor deserved better. And there's no question that she did. But does everybody feel that way? Does everybody actually feel like she deserved better? Do enough people feel like she deserved better? Or do people feel like she got what she deserved? And here's what I mean by that.
Yeah, tell me.
Because think about the law and how it was interpreted, and think about the reaction to the lack of an indictment, the lack of even a mention, quite honestly, in the indictment of her killing, of her murder.
Okay.
The cops were justified when they barged into her house. They were justified to use deadly force because her boyfriend shot at them first.
That's crazy.
The narrative it's almost been like people are trying to paint it as though they were Bonnie and Clyde. And when the cops broke in, they knew it was the cops and decided to get in a shootout with the cops. And you know why that story flies? Is because it's always believable when it comes to black people that we are out of control, that we are inherently violent, and that we are a threat that needs to be neutralized. It's believable because whether it's the boyfriend or the ex-boyfriend, whatever the circumstances is, they got one witness, according to Daniel Cameron, to corroborate that the police announced themselves. So, okay, it wasn't a no-knock warrant. And then once Daniel Cameron, thinking it was an intruder, exercised his legal right to defend himself, the police had a right to fire off 32 shots to defend themselves. And let me say another thing. It's always, and I respect the job police officers do, don't get me wrong, but it's always, well, the police have a right to go home to their families. It's never black people, in this case, Breonna Taylor, have a right to be in their homes and live in their homes and go home to their families. So in other words, the police could defend themselves, but the boyfriend couldn't defend himself. It is always we are always denied justice because it's always justifiable to brutalize black and brown bodies. It's always made to seem like we had it coming. It's always made to seem like we deserved it. And so that's what I'm talking about when it comes to the indifference and the ignorance. It's always a story around our criminality, and we have to be punished. We have to be arrested, charged, tried, and executed right there on the spot, and this is no different.
Mike, let me back up for a second here, okay? And I agree with you, and thank you for sharing that James Baldwin quote. That's one of my literary fathers. As a young writer, I tried, unsuccessfully, I tried to write like James Baldwin. I remember reading his novel, great novel, Another Country, and trying to mimic his style and his flourishes. It's a good aim, though, right? Very ambitious. All right, so let's back up. Let's back up, though. You mentioned the police on this raid, breaking into the apartment. Why was this a good idea at midnight? Let's start there. Why was this a good idea at midnight?
Yeah.
And what were you trying to accomplish? Do you think that the person you're trying to get, because you got bad information, you probably should have talked to some investigative reporters at the Louisville Courier-Journal. Maybe they have better sources than you do. And you think the boyfriend is going to be there, or you think this pot of gold, they thought the money was there. That Breonna Taylor was holding some money for her ex-boyfriend, right. And the rumor was that the money was in the apartment. They found nothing. So the ex-boyfriend's not there, money's not there. They don't find anybody violent. But let's back it up. Why is it a good idea to go there at that hour and to use those means, that methodology? So the whole thing is broken. And as I said to you before, Mike, I'm not trying to minimize a drug lord or drug use or a career involved in dealing drugs, selling drugs. But they responded as if this was somebody on the FBI's most wanted list, and they had to bring everything they had, every single resource,
like they were going
to this apartment.
Somebody. Yeah.
Come on. So that's why I said earlier, you've got to declare where you stand with me. Declare where you stand, and then we can keep it moving. But there's no like intellectual, oh, well, have you considered this? No, I haven't considered.
That's what I'm saying. Right. It's like,
I don't want to play that game.
Let's look at the evidence. Look at her ex-boyfriend, and look at, okay, it's all, again, nobody's condoning any kind of criminal activity, but we have seen murderers, mass murderers, Dylan Roof, taken alive, treated with respect, treated with humanity.
How about this kid, the 17-year-old kid, Kyle Rittenhouse?
Right. Okay? And not disregarded and disrespected in death and put on trial in death. We were criminalized on the spot and then criminalized in death. Well, he had drugs in his locker, or he got suspended from school, or it runs in his family. It all perpetuates the notion that by nature we're violent and have to be policed aggressively, and that story always flies. Law and order is a dog whistle. It is code for we are getting these black people in line. We are saving you in your suburbs from these black people. That is the code word that politicians use. That is the coded language, law and order. That's what that means. People of color, black people, Hispanics, that's what that means. Do not get it twisted. But let me go to the complexity part of this, because we have narrowed this conversation down and simplified it to the tip of the iceberg. I keep saying the extreme manifestation of systemic racism is police brutality. For every Breonna Taylor, there are thousands of black women who are facing oppression and racism and discrimination in the workplace, who are making 66% of what every white man makes for the same job. There are thousands of black people who are being denied the right to excel professionally because CEOs like the one at Wells Fargo thinks that there's a lack of not enough of a big enough pool of black talent to choose from. It starts with education. We talk about education is the answer. Okay, let's talk about the education and the conditioning that these people are receiving. The white supremacist system of education that we're taught in this country, that our leadership at the highest levels in this country, they're trying to eradicate any kind of teaching about critical race theory in order to combat us dealing with the original sins of this country. Let's talk about the education and the conditioning that leads people to get to a point as an adult, whether you're running a company or whether you're on the police force, to feel like people of color, specifically black and brown people, black and brown men and women, have to be treated differently. Why is that the default? Why is it the default? Why does saying I feared for my life, whether he's armed or whether he's carrying a bag of Skittles and iced tea, why does I feared for my life? Why is that always okay? And there's no way you could disprove that, but there seems to be a different level of fear when it comes to us. That's what's being taught. That's what people are being conditioned to believe from a young age, and they grow up and exercise that power in everyday life.
You know, it's gonna be interesting, Mike.